G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 14th of February 2025. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate. And of course, as the Ukraine war continues, Zelensky is out there begging for money, but America didn't show up at his auction of Ukraine. Talks about support for Ukraine, of course. He's not auctioning off his country's future. That's just a conspiracy theory. The liberal establishment doesn't want you to know the truth. That's why I'm the most shunned, avoided, downgraded, failed to reach widespread recommendations to make sure that my truth, well, it is, of course, not the whole truth. I do not have the time, nor does anyone else, to bring you every engagement in this war and every outcome of every engagement. It's like World War II. You really think it was only just 38 battles? There's classified engagements, failed commando raids. Heck, Germany won more battles than it lost, but it lost the big ones. Now, we have drones and missile strikes and more explosions across Ukraine. Well over 200, but reports do vary on the numbers, but throughout the day, it probably reached around 213, 215 in the last 24 hours. Of course, as you'll know, it doesn't actually stop. It's just every hour Russia sends a few, assesses the damage, sees where the air defences are, sees how the Ukrainians adapt. It's an ongoing process. Generals are up day and night looking at battle screens and making plans. But this is why the war is fought in slow motion. It's not fought by AIs. It's not a bunch of young men playing Call of Duty here. These are real men with real lives, and both sides are trying to inflict as much damage on each other without taking high casualties. Ukraine has decided to increase the casualty rate, however, which means they're putting themselves more at risk every day. But they are demanding more and more air defences, and despite the deliveries of these new and amazing Tempest systems, lo and behold, there's 2 missiles on a sports utility vehicle going to stop. Right? Ugh. Especially with drone swarms. And you think, maybe a swarm of but it's a swarm of sports utility vehicles. They don't have a swarm, they have a couple of dozen of them. It's the same with the Air Force. They're flying sorties every day, running the equipment down, and costing themselves lots of money doing it. But this is the point, right? Russia is waging a primarily economic war against Ukraine, and Ukraine has been retaliating in kind, trying to economically destroy Russia on behalf of the British, allegedly. Although Keir Starmer has made it quite clear he wants the Russian economy destroyed, so they can never be a threat to Britain again. Wait, they're not a threat. Who said they were a threat to Britain? You did! In the first place, you're the one who made them a threat. This is the problem with the liberal establishment. The talking heads spew a bunch of nonsense, and the obedient Muppets go, yes, Trump did a terrible thing in Minnesota. He wasn't in Minnesota. Oh, ICE did it. No. Criminals did terrible things to Minnesota. Law enforcement is not a terrible thing. This is the problem with anti-authoritarianism, right? Anti-authoritarianisms will run around basically being authoritarian, right? You don't understand, right? Anti-authoritarianism are a power group who always oppose those in power. But they do it they're increasingly violent and increasingly disobedient. So they're authoritarians, right? They're not wackadoo nutjobs who think they have the privilege, right, to break the law and get away with it because I'm opposing the Nazis. Well, meanwhile, the Russians oppose the real Nazis, yet again, and are slowly grinding them down. But the liberal establishment doesn't want you to know that they are fighting the real Nazis, because the liberal establishment is increasingly authoritarian. Yet the anti-authoritarians are quite happy because it puts them in power, because that is what anti-authoritarianism is all about. Fighting anybody who isn't them. Right? When they got power, they're quite happy to put on the jackboot and say, you can't go to a restaurant unless you show us your COVID card. Remember that, folks. Those who don't want you to show ID and vote wanted to make you get a made-up ID, right, to eat. Right. So, we have most of the front silent. A good sign. Unfortunately, half the front isn't silent. A bad sign. Though Russia has increased its grip on Ukraine, and Ukraine's strategy is not working. Russia is still advancing, although slowly. But that has always been their strategy, and you cannot be sure until about April, May, where the end game is, because don't forget, May is followed by June, and June is President Trump's deadline. Now, isn't it amazing that Canada's running around like chicks from her head going, no, now, President! Well, then stop interfering with US politics, right? Stop crying about the Russians. Start worrying about the Chinese and the Indians carving up your country. Oh, yes, that's right. Diversity! Yeah, stupid old chooks. Right? Get your heads cut off because you're just too stupid to learn. Alright, so Russia's consolidated its positions. Ukraine loves this rail yard, but Russia's don't know where their build-up is in here. But Russia's allegedly been building up for some time. But they do this, right? Ammunition is moving around all the time. Troops are moving around. Troops have to be rested. Now, Russia's made small gains here and there, but not much. They are hitting the Ukrainian build-up, of course. The Ukrainians, particularly here. But, yeah, the Russians made gains here. They may have been pushed back from Tenevere, but the Russians just spread out their front line, and they're still fighting in other areas. And they're still pretty much on par here, slowly moving up, squeezing out to Hulapol. But they have a long way to go because their pace is slow, but they are hitting targets. Often individual targets, often hitting just one car for some reason. Right? I can't get in the head of a Russian commander, nor can Ukraine, right? But I'm pretty sure I make better guesses than Ukraine. Ukraine are serial liars, and I'll get to that quite soon. Alright, but they've hit the port of Odessa again. Now, that's just par for the course. They damage a ship. Why? Because apparently it costs, again, Ukraine just loves to attack Russian targets and then cry when Russia retaliates. But most of the stories about Ukraine, look at it all. Crap, right? Nothing of consequence, like all propaganda. Moving on. Now, this is an interesting piece. Now, this vehicle has been identified either as a modified T90, a modified Brook, or a 2K22. Right? It's actually an old file photo. I'll get to that. But still, when it is in full blaze, as you can see here, it's about to launch two Stellar 10s. These are the replacements for the SA-6. The Stellar 10 is actually an old missile. The current anti-air missile is the Stellar 28. But the Russians have a huge stockpile from the 60s all the way through the 80s of the Stellar 10. Right? Most of the SA-6s were, the Stellar 6 were exported during the Vietnam War. to multiple countries and made Russia, actually for a while, quite rich. The ending of the Vietnam War actually was the beginning of the death knell for Soviet weapon exports, which was subsidizing their economy. But it's not surprising because as track vehicle goes, the BTR, the BMP, the T-72, the T-56, T-72, T-80, T-90s, they're all pretty much similar chassis. They're just different sizes. They're just different weights, right, for different... but ultimately, the military doesn't carefully craft its war. It has to just throw equipment. Oh, yeah. I don't... It's not winter, comrade. Don't care. Send in T-90s and T-80s and T-72s, right? Even though each tank is built for different seasons and different landscapes, they just throw them in anyway, right? But, yeah, Ukraine has lost more territory than they admit to. Remember, this is a Ukrainian site. This is a Russian site. So Russia's going to talk up its victories. Ukraine's going to talk them down. Somewhere in between, they lies the truth. Right. Now, Russian forces have allegedly disposed of 30 ammunition depots across Ukraine. Now, that's what most of these drone and missile strikes are. But you've got to remember, they spread them out, right? They're not going to put 200 tons of ammunition in one place. They're going to never put more than a few tons of ammunition in any one place. Even weapon shipments are spread out, right? We saw what happened during World War II. One failed ammunition delivery on a German train to France cost Germany France. And 3 trains going to Poland was destroyed in sequence, and that destroyed and that cost the Stalingrad, which led to the destruction of. So there have been several catastrophes linked to ammunition that have armies never, ever, ever putting large shipments, right? Except when you're America and can protect them, right? There we go. When identifying this piece of equipment, here's its predecessor, right? And, yeah, you see it's got the long range, the launch rails, but it's got some, these are Comets. This was before the Comet 2 was released. And the Ukrainians are bragging how the Russians abandoned, and they're talking about how their supply lines run out of fuel, new tractor, all these things. Toys for Ukrainians, all the bullshit you think the Ukrainians. I can guarantee you this was sold to the Americans, right? Maybe they gave it to the Europeans. You know, Zelensky is selling off Russian equipment as it's captured. They don't get much, but they do capture. There's no denying, right? But there are many versions of the 2K222, codename Tunguska. Right, this is the Russian code name. It's a tracked self-propelled anti-aircraft gun with surface-to-air missiles. It has many design variants, right? This is the early version. This is the early version, and you can see, right? It's right. There's the SA-10, SA-19, the 14, 11. There have been many variants. Some have got, as you see, the T-56 or the BTR chassis with the Grissom, and this was primarily for low-flying aircraft and helicopters and missiles. But over the years, they have upgraded different chassis, different guns, but it's still pretty much the same thing, right? Twin barrels, twin rockets, but they're followed by the I forget the name of it. It's a supply truck. It's basically an armoured supply truck, and it's got missile hatches. You open up the hatch, take out a few missiles, close it. The internal systems rotate, then they just open up and, like the missiles are stored like in ammunition cases inside. So to try and prevent. But the Russian racks are hand cranked. Were electric cranked. They used to be hand cranked. but they put electric motors on them and have been upgrading their equipment. They are near parity, not total parity, right? They're near parity with Europe, which is why Europe is panicking, right? Any time you look, when Germany was a threat to the, when Germany's industry surpassed Britain, what did the British do? They blew up a German railway in, I think it was Basra, or what's the other one? Ramadi, I think it might have been. It was in Iraq, right? They blew up a Ottoman train in Iraq. Then they let loose the Bedouins with British money, British guns. They hired the Kurds to set loose on the Turks. And they eventually destroyed the Ottoman Empire, which stopped the flow of materials to Germany, right? And slowed German industry. German retaliated with, blocking British interventions in Serbia and trying to prop up the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And started making, but the French and Russians had secret alliances, and they started building up troops simultaneously on the British reports that Germany was going to secretly attack Russia. And so the arseholes who did not fire the first shot go, look at the aggressors! Right? This is the problem when you label Russia the aggressor and say that they invaded Ukraine. You always start with the provocation. Right? It's not the first punch, it's the provocation. So, Russians have taken out 4 Ukrainian operations over the last week, right? And delivered 7 strikes on Ukrainian sites, right? That's not a lot, but they've killed thousands each day. Sometimes, over 2,000. Sometimes hardly any, right? The smaller battle groups only engaged in border activity, border protection, not military action. So, you think any of these people have learnt their lesson? No, of course not, right? They talk out of their ass. Most of them have no clue what's going on in Ukraine. They're just a bunch of high school fascists who come along to your YouTube channel and say, what gives you the qualification to make this assessment? A functioning brain with more than 2 brain cells and years of experience. Now, I can't name World War II battles. I can't give you the strategies of the Russians and Americans and Germans. I can tell you a little bit about the Battle of the Bulge and how fuel became vital. You know, that wonder why the Germans are carrying rubber hoses. What the think you do with rubber hoses and jerry cans, you bloody morons? You know, there's some stupid lines in movies, right? They're just there because movies have to fill out runtime with noise, otherwise the audience get bored because they go, I can go home and look in a picture book. No talking. Ooh, I'm confused. No, it's because actors love the sound of their own voice and they like to pontificate. Oh, I bet you someone's going to clip that and say, completion by projection. I got you, Dave, gotcha. Oh, you're so clever, so stunning, so brave. Alright, so the UKO-Fash have gathered for their Fash meeting in the home of fascism, Munich. The liberal establishment actually wasn't born in Munich, it was born in Athens. But Euro-Fash are now spread throughout the global capitals. Right, no. And they're not all European, okay? Keir Starmer's not European. Right? Zelensky's not European. Right? Look at him. I'm in the centre of the table. I'm the important man. Look at me. Yeah, anybody knows about King's Table? Right? King's Table was big U. Right? You had the you had the knights, right? Opposing knights, right? The Black Watch were actually the Black Knights were actually the day where the you do the dirty jobs. Well, the Shining Knights stand on guard and get all the glory and get to walk around the village saying, "Oh, I'm in the king's good graces." And then you had the lesser nobles, and then you had the king at the end table in the middle, flanked by his most loyal. So you can tell, right? They put Zelensky in the king's position with his most loyal of glazers, and then come the lesser nobles. Symbolism has not escaped me, but you know what's missing? And what they're crying about? That's right, Marco Rubio isn't there. Why? Because America has decided they're not. If they want to end the war, they're not going to fund the war. What an amazing concept. I wonder if that would work. Pretty much guaranteed to work. Give Zelensky no money, and what he has to do is go back to selling women and children on the black market, I guess. Should have put him out of business. But no, you don't get to learn about the Ukrainian crimes because it's all covered up and paved over by the bureaucrats. And those scandals like the Belgium scandal and all that just go away because the mainstream media pulls the plug on the stories. They won't ask the important questions like, how involved were the politicians? How did the rape crisis go on for 20 years and not be noticed? However, Russia's fighting all this, and yet the majority out there don't want to like, don't want to share, don't want to know, don't want to watch, tune out every time because they want to pretend if we ignore crime, it will go away. Now, the next round of negotiations in Ukraine's war on Russia has been announced. They will meet, though the exact date and timing is only known by the Kremlin and Ukraine, and probably Marco Rubio, and thus most of the... But the purpose of the Russian and US meeting is not just ending the war. Trade and economic cooperation, framework for rebuilding the Russian economy, rebuilding the nuclear treaties, disarmament, and other issues. However, they don't like the fact that the US is putting carrots and sticks on the table, right? They want voluntary cooperation. No, you don't get to be libertarian after all these years. No. You don't get to tell Trump how he does business. However, Russia has decided to allocate $1 billion to help Gaza, and that's important because not many people are allocating money to the rebuilding of Gaza. Now, of course, they want more information before they join the border peace. Now, Italy has refused because constitutionally they will not join any organisation where they're not equal partnerships. Well, why are you in the UN then? Why are you in NATO, right? I think it's just because they pretend you have power doesn't mean you do have power in the EU or the UN, right? All right, so unlike the Minsk Accords, Russia doesn't want a memorandum. They don't want a wink and a nod. They don't want Obama's word on it. They want one of these, a Trump folder, right? They want to sit there with Trump. They want a border peace, right? European peace. They want a nice big Trump signature to hang on the wall up beside Putin, and they want their guarantees that if the assholes in Ukraine fuck around, that they will find out, right? And all Europe cares about is getting America in a position to go to war against Russia. just like they did in Vietnam, where the French got peace guarantees off the Americans and then brutalized a bunch of Vietnamese in North Vietnam, got their asses handed to them, and then they went running, crying to Big Daddy at the time. I think it was Truman. And Truman went, no, little man, you cannot be president, or you don't obey me, so you can't be president. What do you mean I can't be president? They elected me. No, you have to obey the French. We have a deal with the French. So, yes, a deal with the French. What horrible words. But, of course, that is what the Europeans mean by friendship. Favoritism. Nepotism. And all these little handshake clubs are all going, yes, let's see how we can create chaos around the world and create war. Of course, you may say, ooh, Israel, yet again. No, it's not just Israel. It's Saudi Arabia, Norway, Denmark, all the sovereign funds, right? Mexico's, all the $1 trillion sovereign funds, right? There's 12 of them in BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Now I'm trying to think. Well, the Rothschilds have fallen, right? So a lot of the older banks, you look at Switzerland, it's slowly, right? Because again, Switzerland was relying on war profiteers. They're all linked to war profiteering, right? All these where do you think the big money is, right? The big money. You think about how are you spending? How you look at the government and the movement, right? Who's the biggest employer? Who's the biggest spender? And where does most money go? It goes on themselves. There's no way, right? Without war, these economies and false money would all fall apart, right? It's backed by violence. It's not backed by gold. It's not backed by trade. It's not backed by any tangible asset, right? There's no way Ukraine can come up with $800 billion, right? No, they're going to be the poor man of Europe being the lapdog of NATO, right? We'll replace American troops. No, you won't, right? You can't even fight Russia. How are you going to play America? That's what they mean. No, the brave Ukrainians. How many are really Ukrainian, right? So this is why people don't want the truth, because they want their fairy tales. They want their glory. They live vicariously through others. But in a sea of red, there's almost no blue. That tells me you're losing. You're in deep poo. Oh, I made a funny. Everybody throw your head back and laugh. But that is the reality, right? And you can't change reality. You cannot manifest destiny. You cannot talk yourself into victory, right? Propaganda, right? The Nazis had the best propaganda, right? Even the Nazi propagandist, I think, was of 1948, said he felt like a fool. He actually believed what he was reading. He felt like a fool. And he testified. He believed that everything he was told, everything was fine, right? Until the Russians broke through the German border, most Germans didn't know where the Russians were. Like, they heard the Amerikaners had just liberated France because they couldn't hide it. But Germany thought, well, if we hold them in Poland, if we get a peace deal, right, we'll blame Polish, right? But what Germany didn't understand, and why the peace deal was never signed, Paulus was alive and he was testifying already, spilling all the secrets, not just about the whole Nazi program, all right? Name names, not just to the Russians, the networks all across Eastern Europe. The Nazis have been building up long before they put Hitler in power, right? There was a secret society, secret organizations. There still are. They're still out there. They're still, right? This is why we have the Ukraine war, right? A lot of the Nazis, like Banderas, escaped justice, right? There was fighting in Ukraine up until 1956, right? took the Russians years to root it out. A lot of them fled to Canada. Oh, good old Canada, they're ever so polite. Yes, because they, keep it's a talk about the past, right? It's the quiet ones you got to worry about, right? Sure, the loud mouthy ones want to punch you in the face now and again, but the ever so polite Trudeaus, they're just virtue signaling, right? It's all performance. Yeah, that's what Liberals care about. Performance. The appearances, old chum. Well, they're broke as bar. Look at England, right? A lot of you nobles were broke, but they got to stay in their manors. They didn't pay their taxes because they had nothing to pay their taxes with. Their tenant farmers were producing next to nothing. But, some of them were war heroes. They didn't kick tenants off their land. The nobles weren't able to collect taxes anymore. The whole system was falling apart. Queen Victoria ran Britain in the ground, right? Right? On paper, billions of dollars of goods were flowing, but in reality, ships were sinking, piracy was costing the empire a fortune, policing it was costing even more, right? It was all appearances. Now, there's some good TV shows on appearances and no need to name them all. I think you could find Keeping Up Appearances and all those, the mockery of the British establishment. Once upon a time, those, On the Buses is a good one as well. Even the working class keep up appearances, But, yes, this whole keeping up appearances and the facade of normalcy, this is the problem, isn't it? And we have this facade in Ukraine. And the facade is cracking. So thank you to each and every one of you. Thanks to all those who like, share and subscribe. And or subscribe. You don't have to do all three every day. I particularly subscribe. Once you subscribe, stay subscribed, please. I need to hit 1,000 just to unlock features. And actually, as my YouTube... the whole YouTube algorithm, right? The more subscribers you get, the recommendations keep flowing, right? But please support the channel. Check out the links in the description below. Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy me merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. I appreciate each and every one of you. Wish you all a war-free future, and see you in the next video. Bye for now.